Hell yeah.
Hello everyone, this is Jose Herrera with the O3XX series. Today's special guest is one of our own, Josh Vance. A little bit about Josh. Josh Vance is an honorably discharged veteran of the United States Marine Corps. He served with 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines Echo Company as 3rd Platoon Team Leader and Assistant Squad Leader. During his time on active duty, he was deployed in active combat operations in Iraq in 2007 and Afghanistan in 2009. He later volunteered to go to the Republic of Georgia in 2010 on a foreign military training unit to assist and train over 180 Georgian Army soldiers to deploy to Afghanistan. Since his honorable military discharge, he has previously worked with a medical robotics company as a field service engineer and now as an implementation project manager. He is married with 2 children. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Semper Fidelis. So yeah, we just have this conversation, man. Wherever you want to start, Paulie. I don't know if you want to take.
No, yeah, I just Josh Vance, 0311, the backbone, I guess some would call it. Not us weapon guys, but yeah. I've known this guy since early time, serving at 2-8 with him. Yeah, so I reached out because I was always
more than that, we were in SOI together.
We were in SOI. I mean, for the initial part, but then I went weapons and you did.
Yeah.
Man, and this is the whole thing. Like, I'm not trying to, rub you a special way or anything, but like back then, and even all throughout our enlistment, like I just always thought that you were this guy that was just like proficient at your job. You loved it, like not just because you were this gear dude that always had like your kit right and everything, because you did, but you paid attention, you knew all the knowledge. And I mean, I didn't even I wasn't in your AO. I mean, I guess we were technically, but not during deployments or anything.
Yeah.
But I just always thought you were good to go. You know what I mean? You were, I felt like you were there for a similar reason that I was, without really knowing what that was.
It's that unspoken desire to serve, right? Like you're there to be the best at your job as you can be, because your job is the spear of the US, right? Like your job is to be there, and you are the dirty end of what is required to push our freedoms and to allow it for others to maintain, right? And to do that, you have to be the best you can, because your job isn't a small cog, right? When you're infantry, your job is to take it to the enemy, and if you don't do that correctly, you're dead, your friends are dead. And and I think a lot of guys, and I think that's where 2-8's a little special, right? A lot of people there had that mentality, right? Like, we are going to be the best. And there was a reason, because I've actually talked to commanders and stuff about that 09 deployment. There was a reason we were chosen to do what we did. We turned a lot of heads when we went to certain training systems, pre-deployment, all that kind of stuff. We ticked all the right boxes in the right way, right? and they, I think that's where we kind of stood out as a generation in 28 was, that mentality was not rare, right? There was a lot of guys in Fox, Echo, Golf, Weapons. Everybody was there for a purpose, right? And I know you guys remember it when in 09, we were told for the longest time, oh, guys are gonna go on a float, right? You're gonna go, like, I think, what were they telling us?
The 2-8 myth, man. Every
Yeah, the
deployment was going
2-8
to be
myth,
new.
right? And we knew they knew for a while that we were going, and then they finally tell us, and we're like, okay, this all makes sense now, right? Like this is why we're doing what we're doing. So yeah, man, it's Tyler, dude. I remember all the way back from SOY. It's we were a different breed, and me and Jose were talking about this before we started talking. I have several friends that are just got out of the Marines. We're 0311, 0331s, things like that. And the Marine Corps we left isn't quite there, right? It has died on the vine, as it were, right? Like, and you look at it, and we were talking about like seniors, right? Like the senior, we all knew who the seniors were because they had the low regs, right? They had a different way of walking, different way of talking. They probably hazed you, and even back then it wasn't okay yet, but still the door shut and the hazing commenced, right? But it was there for a purpose, right? Like if we had guys that were coming back from northern Iraq that spent entire deployment going in contact, right? And then, we went to Ramadi, and, I know it was just like for you guys, other than that one major V bid we got, or I guess two major V bids, other than that, I mean, we were doing patrols to get ice cream, right? Like, I mean, we were playing soccer with kids in the street. It wasn't gunfights every day. It wasn't crazy, right? Because people are like, oh, you went to Iraq, and I'm like, yeah, but it was not that. We didn't go to Fallujah, right? Like, it was, and I almost thought like, wow, this is going to be my deployment, right? Like this isn't what I signed up for, even though we're doing good stuff. But then I remember in 09, my squad leader, Sergeant Delgado, was of that old crew, right? From the, it wasn't Habanilla. I can't remember where they went, but it was up north. And they always told us like, oh, you'll never see gunfights like we saw. Well, by about, I'd call it day 5, day 7, we're getting in gunfights 3 times a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We literally are just restocking ammo every second we get. You sleep where you're sitting, you sleep where you're gunfighting. It was just every single second of the day you were in gunfights. And I don't mean like a pop shot, right? I mean, like you're facing guys with belt-fed machine gun, PKMs, RPGs, just craziness, right? And I looked at him, once one of the gunfights, it kind of calmed down, and we're kind of reloading and stuff. And I was like, hey, so, you guys were talking about, how crazy your deployment was, and stuff. I said, how's this compare? And I'll never forget, he was loading a magazine. He just stopped. He looked at me and he's like, I don't care what anyone tells you. No one on this battlefield right now has ever seen this level of combat. He's like, unless we have somebody here from Fallujah, no, anyone's lying to you that says they've been through something like this. He's like, I've never seen gunfights like this. No one here has seen gunfights like this. He's like, we are in a free fire zone. He's like, last time one of those was declared was Fallujah. And he's like, Phantom Fury, like, and they declared a free fire zone in our AO. And it was insane. I mean, when we come from Iraq, where if you pulled a trigger, you were going to Leavenworth, right? Unless you got shot in the process, you were going to Leavenworth, right?
Yeah.
And now we're in Afghanistan. It's 140 degrees. We're getting into gunfights 3 times a day in like actual ticks, right? Actual troops in contact. And we're getting air assets flown to us 2, 3 times daily, JDAMs, gun runs, nonstop, right? And we get into gunfights where we're implementing Fallujah cocktails and 50 cals, right? And just to sustain, right? Just to actually get through the gunfight. And, you know, that was the other thing I asked him. I was like, were the gunfights like this? And he said, no. You know, in Iraq, we were fighting an insurgency, right? It was pop shots. They you know, hit you real quick and then they're gone. You know, when we're fighting an enemy, the Taliban would sit there for 3 hours, right? And hit you. I mean, we got into a gunfight that lasted 8 hours one day, 8 hours. And we were in, it was an L shape, a U shape that formed into another L shape. And we're listening to the ICOM chatter and we're pushing across. I'll never forget the 8 hour one, because one of the Brits, one of my good friends got shot in the neck. He survived and got to go home to his family, but we had to get him medevaced, and then we took it to him, right? And we enveloped around, and we were pushing across, and we were literally across this little ditch. And we were pushing across about 100-yard wide field, and we had our interpreter with us, and he had the, you know, the icon, right? And he's like, hey, stop. We're like, okay. We turned on and we're like, what? We know we're online, like, I mean, straight up freaking Vietnam style. And we look at him, we're like, what? And he's like, they just said wait 100 meters and engage, and like basically point blank range engage. And literally 100 meters in front of us is a tree line that is perfect cover, and we are literally in a dirt field. And we all lick each other. I look at my team and I'm like, combat glide, weapons up. And literally we're in 29 palms again, combat gliding across an open field. But the only difference is that we have weapons, you know, safety's off, hot, and I have a 203 in my, you know, tube, safety off with the finger on it, right? We made the 100 meters. It was okay. You know, nothing happened because I think they realized what was coming for them. But, you know, that's the type of level of stuff we're encountering, and it changes your mindset, right? I mean, that is not something, there's not a lot of training that'll prepare you for that, right? And it goes back to the seniors, right? I mean, the guys today don't have seniors that have seen that, right? Very few guys getting out today have ever seen combat. And, you know, how do we train the next Marine, the next infantry fighter to prepare for that level of nonsense? I think that is a question that is hard to answer, if it's able to be answered at all, because nothing hones a blade better than a stone, right? You can't hone a blade in air or in a cloud. You have to hone it against stone. And if you don't hone that blade against true strife, against true friction, you don't know what that blade's capable of. You might swing and it might not cut anything. And I think that's one thing that I think the modern military has to look into, is preparing for that, right? And it's a disturbing thing to think about, because when you have guys that are getting ready to potentially go to combat, I mean, look at the world. It is going sideways. And any second, the Marines are going to be the first ones in. And will they be okay, right? And I don't know. That's a hard question to answer.
Yeah, especially because I mean, me and Jose kind of get into this quite a bit about like what is the next battlefield or battle space going to look like? You know, regardless, there's still going to be bodies there in whatever capacity or, you know, strategy is being used, you know. But I mean, of course, we're not involved with the way things are playing out and how training's being regimented there. But I do feel like, you know, 12, 13, 14 years removed from it, it's still somewhat fundamentally the same.
Yeah.
Right. You're still, you know, apart from some of the MOSs being moved around and, you know, machine guns, mortars, you know, that stuff's up in the air about, are they going to go all to a weapons company and just be support by fire from, you know, whatever, however they're doing it, but they're still going out and doing the basics, I think, from what I see, you know, on social media or whatever. So it's like, well, you know,
there's a difference in that though. War has not changed for thousands of years. It is always the same. It's just the modality, right? It's just weapons get bigger, weapons get stronger, they get smarter, right? But the issue we're going to run into that is not able to be trained is mentality, right? Is the psychological innate desire or thought process that pushes a man forward into combat. That is something that is lacking in today's society. We have sadly a weak society now, right? Like it, we had weak people that went to Afghanistan with us, but they weren't weak coming out. And it goes back to that idea of honing the knife, right? You can only do so much until there's actual strife. But if you don't have strife, you can only do that so much legally in training, right? When you go to war is going to be the same. I don't care what you add into it. I don't care who or what's fighting. If it's sticks involved, if it's nukes, right? War is going to be the same. It's always going to be violence. It's always going to be us versus them, right? And to your point, all those philosophies, they're going to change a little bit depending on the modality of how the war is fought. But the mentality of the individual war fighter is changing, is softening, right? And there's some stuff that just no training in the world can prepare you for. Literally the entire earth around you lifting into the sky, and you have to go through it. If your mentality's not there, if you're not there for the right reasons, are you going to go? Is your whole platoon going to go when they say to go? I don't know. That's the big question, right? Is that mentality still there? There are people like that, right? But they are the absolute minority in society. And I don't mean the US, society in general, right? Everybody's comfortable with their cell phone, right? Everybody's comfortable with their Amazon Primes. You go into the field for 3 weeks in the rain, and all you got's on your back. And then you add violence into that you can't get away from. That's going to be an interesting time. And I think that is where that might be necessary, and as bad as that sounds, war should never be necessary. But, it goes back to that philosophy that has been circulating recently, hard times create strong men create weak times, or good times, and then good times create weak men, right? And then it repeats. And, good times have created weak men. And I'm afraid that we're going to see some very hard times show up soon. And a lot of that weakness is going to get, weeded out, right? And what's the saying with, the wheat separated from the chaff, right? There's a lot of chaff right now. And I think that wheat will be lacking in numbers when all is said and done, which is a sad thing, right? And that's the hard thing that I think a lot of guys in our background and our experiences are now we're required to be tempered, and I don't know a good way to put this, but basically we're required to turn our volume down, as it were, right, in society, because people cannot take men of our caliber that have been through true strife, true violence. It gives you a different view on the world. And I always liken it to, and I've told this to multiple friends, it is when the curtain of evil, or just the darkness of the world, if that curtain's pulled back, there's no shutting it, right? It's there. And you can't unsee that side of the world. And there's certain stuff that you see when that's pulled back that is it's unable to be unseen, right? And you are absolutely perceptive to it moving forward. And that goes to anything. PTSD is a part of that, right? And because I've talked to somebody, and they were like, you seem pretty normal. Like, do you have PTSD? And I'm like, because they know what I've been through. And I'm like, look, if you go through that level of combat and you don't have PTSD, there's something wrong with you. You can't go through that level of violence, that level of true insanity is the only way to describe it, and come out normal. It just doesn't happen. Your brain changes. And Jose, that kind of goes back to what we were talking to before the podcast started. I was talking to a young girl who she was asking kind of why I got tattoos and stuff and what they meant to me. And just so everybody's aware, I have a full sleeve, and my whole back's covered. I don't even know how many hours of tattoos, right? And every single one of them means something. And I was talking to her about, joining the Marines, and, everybody always likes to say, I went to the Marines and it changed me, right? It made me a better person. And I'm like, look, when you go through boot camp, right, the Marines don't make you better. They simply heighten who you are. You go in as a good person, you come out great. You go in as an okay person, you come out pretty decent. You go in as a shitty person, you come out being able to fake a pretty okay person, right? But when you go into combat and you see that, that level of violence, that level of true horror that you witness, and some of those times that horror lasts for a millisecond, 3 seconds. And those 3 seconds you will remember for the rest of your life. So when you go in the Marines, yes, it heightens you. But when you go into combat, it changes the very fiber of your soul, because you have seen something, you have experienced things. I mean, nothing in this planet can make you ready for children missing limbs, crying, begging you to help them, finding a friend that you've made who's 10 years old that's been decapitated because he was your friend, watching your best friend die. Nothing on this planet will ever prepare you for that. And that rewires and sears into your soul something different and makes you perceive the world differently, because you know what the world is capable of, and it's capable of horrible things. But when you come out of that, you have a choice. You have a choice. You can either let that destroy you and make your soul something that you don't want to be a part of. And a lot of guys do. I think that's why we have such a horrible suicide rate. I've lost countless friends to suicide, alcohol, glory seeking, right? Or adrenaline seeking, right? Activities that have made them leave too early. And, in that, if you can see that much bad, then you turn around and you see things like my 2 kids. I have a daughter who's 2 and a son who's 5. I don't care how bad my day is. If my daughter laughs, my day's better, right? And being able to, I think that's what really defines people, is being able to go through those experiences. You will have PTSD no matter who you are. I don't care what you've been through. And PTSD has all different sides. I have friends that are just like, man, I have PTSD because whatever happened, right? Like, name anything, a car wreck, whatever. And they tried to downplay it. And I'm like, look, PTSD is not combat inclusive, right? PTSD is everything. There's a lot of stuff in this world that can happen to you that can change your soul and the way you view the world. And it is how you get up, not how you fell down, that changes who you are and defines who you are. And I think a lot of vets need to look at that and kind of think, who am I going to be, right? Am I going to let this destroy me, or am I going to let this build me up and make me stronger, right? It goes back to the same thing. What hones a knife, right, is that stone and that friction. And am I going to let that dull my blade, or am I going to let that hone me into something better, right? And am I going to use that moving forward? And a lot of guys get lost in that. And I think a lot of guys in '09 got lost from that. Because I mean, the violence we experienced, I was talking with a friend the other day, and, my wife makes fun of me because of the way I sleep, right? To this day, in '09, so that was 13 years ago. To this day, I sleep in our king size bed about 6 inches from the edge, pencil straight, my left hand on my chest, my right hand directly straight down my side. And it's because in Afghanistan, when we went to sleep, you kept a hand up near your chest. So if Taliban broke in and they went to kill you, you had something to grab their hand to get it off your throat. And your right hand was on your M4 the entire time. Hot. We slept with hot weapons. I slept with a grenade inside my 203, safety on, a round in the chamber, magazine in, safety on of my M4 for 6 months straight. And the only time it was unloaded is when I made it unloaded by pulling the trigger, and then I reloaded it. And that is how we slept every night, because in down south, it was interesting. We had a main base, right? We had Cop Sharp, named after Seth Sharp, who got killed on day one. And we had made all these little OPs, these outposts, all around the perimeter. We had OP South, OP Palace, OP West, OP North, and basically my platoon would rotate squad to squad at each place, and they were not built very well. We took over buildings, and it had an open door and a compound, maybe a wall or two, right? And that's where you lived and fought from. And we got hit pretty consistently, right? And when you went to sleep, everybody, I remember my squad leader talking about this. When we went to sleep, we didn't pray for seeing the sunrise, because that night they moved around, but they didn't fight us, right? They knew we had night vision. They knew we had thermals, so they kind of ignored us. But you always prayed to see the next sunset, because the next day was absolutely not guaranteed. The amount of violence that was promised the next day was pretty much guaranteed, and absolute. And it always came. Towards the end of the deployment, we finally started not having firefights every day, right? But you knew when you woke up the next day, it was going to be 140. You were going to go on patrol. You were probably going to get hit. And there were places we knew, the next day we're going on patrol past the 19, right? And if you went past south of the 19 parallel, you got hit within 2 minutes, maybe. And if we got told, hey, tomorrow we're going to the 19, you went to sleep knowing you were getting in a gunfight tomorrow. And it was sombering, right? It's a different way to think. It's a different way to live. And I don't know, it's interesting, right? Like it's how do you deal with that? And like, I know you guys up north, you guys had a whole different, stuff you were dealing with, right? I mean, everybody had these crazy, that whole deployment, every company had just crazy deployment, right? I mean, it was abnormal. We were on the front news of every web page, right? And that's, I don't know if you guys dealt with the same thing, but I'll never forget, we were on patrol and the New York Times went with us. And there's a picture on it was on the front page of New York Times, an IED hitting our squad. And in the picture, you saw our corpsman's, the back of his helmet, as he was running towards the IED that went off, and it said Kronquist. Well, my mom knew every single member of our squad, and she opens up, gets the newspaper on her, her computer, and opens up and sees Kronquist, and then she sees the outline of me right outside the explosion. We got, I don't know about you guys, we got stat phone calls, once every 2 weeks, I think, maybe, if that, right? And if we were in River City, that wouldn't happen. And so I called her, whatever, a week and a half later, and there was this huge sensational story and all this stuff. But the funny thing is, none of us got injured, right? We had a couple of concussions because it was actually designed to hit a vehicle, right? And it was command detonated, but no one got really hurt. Everybody walked home, right? And so she was like, oh, people are dying. You got hit with an IED, blah, blah. And I'm like, how do you even know that happened? Right? Like, one, everything you're saying is incorrect. Two, yes, I got hit, but I'm okay. Right? Like the guys are okay. Can you send us more baby wipes? Right? Like, I mean, just, you're good. Chill out. And that was the whole deployment. I think that's also what made 09 so crazy, is it was so televised. I know you guys had news crews coming. We had them constantly. And that's also why I don't trust the media anymore. I have most of the news clippings that we had from over there, and it is astonishing the amount that are incorrect. And some of them, is a picture of something happening and then describing something that happened 2 weeks prior, right? It had nothing to do with what we were there doing. And it created a very big distrust, right? And like, you guys aren't describing what were really happening. You're not describing the true story of what's happening here. You're getting the sensational thing that happened for 2 minutes yesterday. And the reality is what happened an hour before is what matters more, right? Is the kids we helped, the family that we pulled out of that building before, the Taliban hit it with some rockets, right? I mean, that's what matters. And they don't care. They want what sells papers, right? And I think, Tyler, that's what you and I were talking about when I was in Eyewitness War. So I was in there. I sat interviewed for, I think, 6 hours straight, right, about everything. And there was one story about the Harati Wall, which is Harati was this small village just south of our main base. And we were actually at OP South, which faced it, was just north of it. And they really weren't coming past the wall. They kind of had taken a break. And I think they were rearming or switching out people, whatever, but they still had people watching us from that wall. It was maybe, I don't know, half a click south. Well, we had to make a reason to do a patrol, right? So because we needed to go up to the market just north of us by about 100 meters and get flour so we could keep making bread. And we had a little frying pan and some oil, and we'd make, fried little red bread biscuit things with like some salt, sugar, and flour. And so we had to make a reason. So there was only a squad plus there. So there was 16 of us. So we couldn't send a patrol out without a decent amount. So we sent I think 10 or 12 guys out, right? There was maybe, let's call 5 of us left in the base. And we're like, look, go down south, get eyes on the wall, come back, stop by the stuff and get our flour. The whole reason we're actually patrolling, then come back in. Well, they took a black gear, right? So those little Motorola walkie-talkies didn't even take green gear because we didn't have any, right? We had one for the compound, and that was it. So they roll south. Well, I'm sitting there cleaning my M4, and I literally had taken the bolt, I had slammed it in, and I clicked the receiver shut, and I hit the pin, and then all you see is just tracers go over top of the building. And then you hear all the gunfire. We were like, oh God, this isn't good. Like, that's our team. So me, my squad leader, because the thing is, the guy that we sent out to be on the patrol was our newest guy, Cochran, and he was a boot technically. And he joined us right after Iraq, and he was a team leader. And so he was the one in charge, and he's trying to talk to us on black gear, and we can't even hear him. So we had a green gear, like a 152 or 153, whatever it was. And we grabbed what we could, some belts of ammo, Darren Dale grabbed, the 240 that we had with us and everything. And 5 of us went sprinting down, or no, 4 of us went sprinting down this road to get to where they were. And that's the fastest I've ever ran freaking 400 meters in my life, in full kit with extra ammo and stuff. We get in, and we get into this field, and we see them about, I don't know, 40 yards ahead of us, absolutely ass in the wind. rounds hitting all around them. They were in an L shape, and we could tell what happened, which was there was one guy about, I don't know, 40 meters ahead of everybody, just laying there in the middle. And we were like, oh no, did somebody get shot? Right. And we could tell what happened is they got hit. That was the point man, and they all consolidated into an L shape. Well, in Eyewitness War, they made it sound like he was not doing his job, freaking Bolchi wasn't doing his job, and like he was an idiot, right? And out there. But the reality was when he was point man, when they got hit, he simply did his training, dropped, and started returning fire. Well, everybody else pulled back to a line and didn't let him know, right? So in the fog of war, poor bastard's out there by himself, not fault of his own, right? It just happened, right? So in turn, we get up, we kind of supply everybody with extra ammo. I tell my saw gunner to get up and start giving some suppressing fire. And we're like, okay, we got to roll. But I was like, but we got to get Steve. Like, we can't leave him there, right? And in there, it made it sound like we were all getting up, walking away. And, oh, God, we forgot him. Like, no, we knew he was there. And it's like, we can't leave. We can't just pick up and leave. We got to get him back to the line, and then we can consolidate and bail. So, I ran up and got him and pulled him back. And, we exfilled and everybody, and this is why war is so weird. So we're in this massive firefight. No one got hit, by the grace of God. I don't know how. No one got shot. And we get in, we had to egress through the canal. The canal was probably, I don't know, like belly button, maybe a little bit higher deep, right? I mean, some deep water that we egress through. And trucks had come, they were shooting 50 cals over our heads. And as we're going through the water, everybody's pissed off, not because we're getting in a gunfight, not because RPGs are flying over our head, but because everybody's cigarettes were in their freaking cargo pockets, right? And it's like, thinking back, I'm like, wow, we were literally like this close to death. And everybody's pissed off that their cigarettes are wet and their dip is wet. Like, that, why?
Did
Small
the flour
things
make
matter, man.
Yeah, did the flour make it back?
Well, we didn't even go get the flour.
Oh, you did.
Flour was the last objective.
Oh,
right?
it was at the end of
So yeah, so we didn't even get the flour.
Yeah, the one thing about that, watching that, because talking to you, and I knew like years ago there was something like some TV episode or whatever. It's on Nat Geo, and you can get it on Amazon Prime. It's where I got it. I just like bought the whole series, and I've watched a few of them, which are pretty. They're pretty good. The way they did it was pretty good.
Yeah.
At the time, it was what was needed, I think. But yeah, like you were saying though, like I know no one like you and your guys in Echo Company, like they made it seem like leaving him there was even in the question at all. You know what I mean? Like that's how the episode came across, where it's just like, oh, should we get him? Like that's just kind of how. And I was like, it was weird because I know Steven, he's an assaultman, and I was just texting you about it, and I was like, man, I can't believe, he's making us look bad. And you're like, no, dude, you're like, I need to clear this up because that was the episode. Like, it wasn't that what the cut they took just cast it in a bad light. And but no, it's a good.
Well,
was that all from your GoPro or chest camera or something?
So I didn't have one on me. Who was it? Somebody had
actually they didn't even have. I've looked this up since then because I had like this weird something like Kodak ZI6 little video. They didn't even have GoPros out yet.
Yeah,
when we were there.
So this was it was some kind of helmet camera that one of the guys had bought that he had, and they actually had to splice in another gunfight from video from a Brit from that 8-hour one. Because we just didn't have enough video to show what had actually happened, because the video was literally in a pile of dirt half the time, because we were too busy gunfighting, right? Like, I mean, we were in an L-shaped ambush, getting our asses handed to us. You don't think about, oh, I need to get a better camera angle.
Yeah.
But yeah. And then I felt so bad for Steve because he's just like, man, it makes me look, horrible and all this stuff. And I'm like, dude, I was like, it's media, right? Like
Yeah.
they wanted to manipulate to make it sound, more crazy than it really was, right? And to your point, like they made it sound like leaving him was an option.
Right.
And that is the difference, is that it wasn't. There was no finishing that day where all of us weren't walking home, right? And whatever that was required, we were going to do, right? And that's the other thing about, society not understanding the Marines, right? Not understanding combat infantry in general. And especially Marines, is not how we're wired, right? The idea of, no man left behind, that's that doesn't even really envelop the true thought process of it, right? Like, I mean, the reality is it's not no man left behind. It's that we're all going home or no one's going home, right? And we're going to work towards that end no matter what it takes. And in my experience, we have committed some very significant high levels of violence to ensure to that end, well above probably what was necessary. Because when losing isn't an option and retreating really isn't an option unless, you're just forced to because, you're all going to die otherwise. It changes the way you react, right? It changes the way you perceive what's necessary to be done. And in that moment, they're, thinking back on it, I'll never forget, we knew he was there. We knew we had to get out of there, right? Because it was just, we didn't have the ammunition or the weaponry to fight the way we needed to fight in that moment. Because I mean, when you're overwhelmed, right? I mean, I don't care if you got 50 cals above you. If you got, 35 people opening up on you with belt feds, you need to reassess your situation, especially when you're laying in an open field with no cover. But I'll never forget when we saw, Steve's out there and we're like, okay, we got to go. I'm like, okay. And I'm looking around and, I'm the assistant squad leader. My squad leader is trying to coordinate everybody to figure out where the fires are going. And it's, I knew, okay, I'm a squad leader. I got to go get him. Like there wasn't an option here. Right. And I'll never forget, I looked at Delgado. I was like, I got to go get him. And then he looked at me, looked around, and he's like, make it fast. There wasn't like, oh no, we can figure. No, it's just like, okay, yeah, that's what we're doing. Right. And, it goes back to the infantry mentality. Cause I'll never forget, in training, right. You do the covering fire, right? Like you yell that out and everybody provides, withering fire down. Right. I'll never forget. I was about up on the berm, so it's an L shape. Right. And he was about mid center of it. So I had to, I wasn't going to run across gunfire. Right. So I'm running behind all the guys and, I book a hard left and just start sprinting towards him as I'm screaming, covering fire. And I mean, as I'm running, you literally just watch the sky and oxygen turn into fire, right? Like all the tracers, everything's going past you. And in that moment, it's just like, wow, this is happening, right? Like, and what brings you back to reality is as the bullets are snapping past your ear, going the opposite direction, right? It's like, okay, that's an interesting feeling, my ear just moved because a bullet passed by it, right? And you get there and I'm just like, dude, and he actually has a nickname now that I refuse to call him anything else, which is Jedi. Because when I got to him, you guys remember the fields over there. It's that kind of churned up soil. Steve had a freaking U shape cut around his frame in the dirt from bullet impacts. And it literally looked like he had a force field on. Like, I mean, it just did. Like the way the dirt was chewed up, I literally did a double take as we're getting shot at. And like that, it almost looked like he physically dug it and he didn't, but it was bullet impacts. Like And, so, I'm like, dude, we got to go. Right. Like, he's like, all right. I'm like, I'm going to shoot a 203, start running. We're leaving. So I crank one off and he leaves. And this is actually the moment in my life that I truly understood there was a higher power. Because I shot the 203, I'm kind of kneeling in that ditch that had been cut. I call it a ditch. It was, all of whatever, an inch and a half deep, but it felt like a ditch at the moment. And I shot the 203, it hit near the tree I wanted it. And I went to stand up, and my right knee, at first I thought it gave out, but then I felt something pushing me down. I'll never forget my right shoulder, because my rifle was in it. My right shoulder got pushed down. And right when that happened, a bullet literally snapped right past my ear. And if I had kept standing up the way I was turning, it would have been a hard shot instantly. Like, there's no question in my mind. Because, when you're standing with gear, you kind of lean back because you're trying to get 100 pounds on, right? You're trying to situate that. And then, I felt someone push me down. I'm like, okay, what, is Steve still here? Like, what is he doing? I told him to run. And I turn, and Steve's back at the line. There is no one around. And I'm like, all right, that's my cue to run, right? Like, it's time. So I tried standing up again. I was able to get up, booked it back. To this day, there is no explanation whatsoever other than something stopped me. And I think that goes back to when you pull back that veil, there's two, it's, you see it, it sees you, right? And in the darkness, there's also good things that are fighting in the darkness. And I think when you have to step in there, you're not alone. And I think that when you are truly involved in that level, in that closeness to death and violence, you, and this is going to go super philosophical, you are closer to the death than anybody else in that moment. And you see it, it sees you, and what is on the other side sees you. And there's decisions being made, and you're not a part of those decisions. And if this kind of goes back to our philosophy when we were over there, and I had multiple people from multiple news agencies ask me this, because, how can you just go do this kind of stuff? And the reality of an infantryman and men of violence is that you have to operate like you're dead already. Once you realize that there is a moment in time where your life is going to end, and where you're at, that might be soon. And what you have to make in that moment is a choice, whether that's going to paralyze you or that's going to make you move forward. And when you have men on your left and your right that are relying on you, especially as a team leader and stuff, you don't have a choice. You have to go forward. No matter how scared you are, no matter how crazy things are, you must push forward. And if you don't, others will die in your stead. And I made a promise to my team before we left, Camp Lejeune. And I brought them together. It was Stephen Wasco and Timothy Daughtry, my point man and my saw gunner. Steve had been in the Marine Corps at that point 5 months. He literally had been in our unit for 2 weeks before we deployed. And I discussed with him privately, because he was not the most squared away when he got to us. He was in a different team, and they put him in my team because he needed a different form of leadership. I'll never forget, we were standing in front of we were doing weapon pull for final checks before, like a week before we left. He got put in my team. I think he'd been in my team for about 5 hours. And we were standing out there. We were going to go get weapons, but we were outside of the armory. And he screwed up something else again. I pulled him to the side. And I'm like, look, I was like, I need you to really get your head right about what's about to transpire. I was like, look, we are about to deploy to the most dangerous place on the planet. We're about to deploy to the most dangerous province in the most dangerous place on the planet currently. And you, Daughtry, and myself are all we have. And I need you to be okay. I need you to perform. And if you can't, I need to know that, because there's some work we're going to have to do to get you to that point. But just know that everything I do is with the intention to keep you 6 feet above the ground. And that if I'm telling you to do something, it's for a purpose. And if I need you to do something, it's for a purpose. I'm not going to tell you to throw your life away meaninglessly. I might, to protect you, but my promise to you is I'm going to get you home if you do what I tell you to do. And I brought my team together because it's that hit him pretty hard. And the day we were going to leave, I pulled them together away from all the families. And I was like, my promise is what it's always been. I might not make it home, but my goal is that both of you will. And I'm going to do everything I can to make that happen. And I walked up to both their families and told them the same thing. And my family was standing there when I told them that. And they knew who I was and what I was about. And they understood that I was not lying. And sometimes as the leader, you have to make choices that are to your detriment, but are to the greater good of your team, your people you're in charge of. And I take that even to my corporate job today. Sometimes you have to sacrifice to make a good choice for others, right? And that's true leadership. And that's not something that can really be taught. It's only something that can be done, and done through repetition. And I'll never forget. I still have it to this day. It took me about 5 years to actually let my parents read it. But on that eve, when we were going to helo insert to Helmand, what is it, 18 clicks past the PV line, I sat in my little notebook that I kind of kept all my notes of different firefights and stuff. In the very back of it, I wrote a 2-page note to my family in the case of my death, and what I thought and who I was, and why if it came to it, why I'd given my life. And me and Daughtry did the same, and Steve did the same, and we all had it in the same place in all of our packs. And the rule was, whoever goes, one of the other two has to get that to our families. And that is the only mission we have if one of us goes. And I told them, I said, you better be the ones giving this to my family and not the other way around. I said, I need you guys to listen to me. And they did. And I'll never forget the moment I saw it click in Steve. We were on the first of the 4 helicopters that landed. Our platoon was in charge of securing the LZ. So we were first ones on the deck with the commander and everybody. And it wasn't until about the 3rd wave when we started actually getting shot at, because that's when they kind of realized that this was happening. And, it was pot shots at first. And I'll never forget, we were watching the Southern line in this little grove of trees, and the snipers were above us kind of looking at stuff. And out of nowhere, all of 5-6 feet above our heads, we're hearing AK-47 rounds, every once in a while, just random. Steve was maybe 4 feet to my right. And before we got on the helo, I told him, I said, look, as a boot, anybody who's watching, you always call, Lance Corporal Vance, right? Whatever. And I told him, I said, look, all of that's out the window. I was like, I don't care what you have to call me. I don't care if it's Vance, Josh, hey, fuckstick, whatever you have to do to get my attention, you do it. I don't care. I was like, all of that stupid stuff is out the window. I was like, we are going into combat. We are going into our possible deaths. So if you need to get my attention, all this stupid Mickey Mouse stuff that we've been doing back in the rear is gone. I was like, we are going to combat. So whatever you need to do. And he's like, Roger, Lance. And I just looked at him and he's like, Roger that, Vance. I was like, all right. And we get on the bird. So we're laying there and these rounds are popping over us. I'll never forget that, you know, he really hadn't said it. He'd said Lance Corporal a couple of times since we've been on the deck. I'm hearing those rounds snap over and I know exactly what they are. I know where they're coming from. I just can't get a beat on the shooter. And then he goes, you know, he had this weird way of talking. He's like, Vance? Yeah, what's up, brother? And he goes, what's that sound? And about then you hear another going over top. And I said, that, my friend, is incoming AK-47 fire. Welcome to combat. And I kind of look over at him and he never leaves behind his sight. He never leaves a sight picture. And he just goes, Roger that. And then I look over and I watch his thumb flip the safety off. And I was like, he's in it. He understands. We're good. And I never had an issue with him the entire rest of the deployment. It was that moment. And that's where I go back to, you know, you can't train that. That was the moment where everything clicked. Everything he had been taught in the past 7 months at that point, 6 months at that point, made sense. And everything I had drowned into him in that 1 week I had with him, and we had done other stuff before, made sense. And he was in it. It was time to go. And I'll never forget, there were several times on deployment, he'd come up and ask me a question. And I'd tell him what it was or what we were doing or what that meant or whatever. He'd hear something in a brief he didn't understand and we'd go through it. But by the end of that deployment, he was as salty as all of us. I mean, crazy stuff we had been through, things that no human should ever experience, we experienced together, right? And to this day, me and Steve talk on a weekly basis. And
phone 1 disconnected.
So that's my bad. But so, you know, things like that are what change people and make them understand what true focused, true infantry mentality is. Doesn't get learned in a bubble. It gets learned in the fire, right? As the metal's being heated is when those lessons kick in. And that's, some of those lessons are hard to learn and hard to come back from. And you know, I think back on it, and you know, I've done a lot of firearms instruction since I've been out and taught law enforcement, stuff like that. And inevitably the question always comes up, right? You know, how am I going to act under combat? How am I going to act under that moment? And I tell them, look, I'll tell you how you're going to act. And that is, I have no idea. You have no idea. You will not know until that moment comes. And I said, let me tell you a story. And I was like, 2 different guys before we deployed. One of them worked out every day, heavily muscular, talked the biggest game, said he was going to get the most kills, everything, name shit talking, name anything. And that was him before deployment. Take the other guy, devout Mormon, quiet as the breeze, very slow to anger. The kid played D&D in the barracks on the weekends, right? He and I played video games together. Good friend of mine. Firefight happens. The big muscular dude is crying in a ditch. And Charlesworth was standing in the middle of the road with a 249 saw, looking like Rambo, dumping an entire 200 round belt while rounds are skipping all around him and tearing holes in his fucking cannons. You don't know who you're going to be until that moment. And, you know, anybody back in the States would have thought it'd be opposite, right? That kid, Charlesworth, they asked him after that was all said and done, they pull him down into the ditch when he's reloading. And they're like, why'd you do that? And he's like, because they tried to kill me. That's it. They tried to kill me and my friends. That was his reason. And if there's no better reason in the world, that's it, right? And in that moment, he knew who he really was, and the other guy did too. And it takes that heat, that violence, that veil ripping to understand who you are sometimes. And sometimes you won't know until that moment. And I, teaching concealed carry classes, I'm like, look, all of you have made a very, very valid reason to come here and get trained on how to do this stuff. Because you want self-protection, you want to protect your family. But I can't tell you how you're going to react. And sometimes running is a better option if you can't react in the way that needs to happen, right? But in infantry, we don't have that choice. It's do it or somebody dies. And some of those guys that were crying in ditch were sent home. And you can't have that in a combat zone where they're, you need to perform. And that's a hard lesson for a lot of people to learn. And I think that's where some PTSD really gets to people, is they might have not liked who they were, or who they figured out they were. And that I think is worse PTSD than normal combat, because if you find out that you're a coward, or not even a coward, that you're mentally not able to take it, right? That doesn't mean you're a coward. There are cowards, but a lot of guys, you get into combat and it's not normal. You're not in a normal place. You're not in a normal human condition, right? And some people can't take it. I mean, I've seen people digging holes with their bare hands in dirt because the fear got to them that bad, which is fine. That happens. Fear can get to them. It's what you do with that fear that does, and the people have said it before, and it's absolutely true. Were you ever scared in combat? Absolutely. Every freaking second. If you're not scared, you're a psychopath, right? Like RPGs flying past you, and that's actually something funny. So we all did seps and taps, right? Like, so I had to go to seps and taps, and I'm sitting there with a couple of guys that were from the 09 era. And we're all, is in that big auditorium, right? That has like the stadium seating. We're up in the top left, right? And there was a couple guys that were from like CBRN and some guys from like an S2 shop or something were up there with us. And there was like 4 or 5 of us from 2-8, and we're all sitting up there. And I'll never forget, this guy was giving a talk about, when you go out into the real world, you're gonna be in a job and they're gonna require you all this stuff, and it's gonna be stressful. And I leaned back in my chair, and apparently I said this louder than I thought I did. I was like, that's not stress. It's like, stress is your best friend looking you in the eyes and screaming RPG. That's stress. And our whole corner just started laughing, because I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much it, right? And this guy's like, well, it's not really comparable. I'm like, oh crap, I said that a little too loud. And but that's the truth, right? Is there's different levels of stress, but that level of stress is uncomparable, right? I mean, your best friend looking at you, and I say that from experience, right? Your best friend looking you in your eyes and screaming RPG is not an image that ever leaves, right? Like, you remember it, even though nothing happened. You remember it. And that exact instance was Villegas. V is what we called him. Same spot that Steve had asked me about the bullets. We had kind of moved back there, and it was me and V, because V had our Mark 12, our DM rifle, and we were trying to get eyes on the shooter and stuff. And I walked up there. I'm standing, he's standing. We're trying to figure out, because it's super flat area next to those little canals, and we're like, okay, where should we set in? Well, then you hear the thump in the distance, and anybody who's never been shot at by an RPG, it's not like the movies. You don't watch it go. If you watch it go, you're safe, because it's not going to hit you. The worst sound of an RPG is when the sound doesn't change, because that means it's flying right at you, right? Well, this sound wasn't changing, and he looked me right in the eyes and screamed RPG as I'm screaming it. And then it turned into Looney Tunes. We're literally, bouncing back and forth, because there's no cover. We don't know where to go. And we're looking at each other and like, just stutter stepping left and right. And then he's like, what do we do? And I'm like, left. So we both just dove left, and we literally watched the smoke go right over top of us. And we watched the round hit inside the LZ and blow up. And, if we had stayed standing, if the fins might have hit us, the round might have hit us, we don't know. And, but it's like, thinking back, it's hilarious. But at the time, that's stress, right? I think back when my kids are watching, what's that movie? Inside Out or whatever, where you're looking at the kid's mind, and a core memory has just been created, right? Like it's that is a core memory created, right? And a lot of those happen overseas, and kind of it's a lot of terror, and then there's that moment in time that's frozen that you remember, and it is right. So
Yeah, and that kind of ties into like you're talking about thrill, like guys thrill seeking and just being wild, because you get that flatten effect after something like that, right? Like what can compare to that adrenaline rush or that amount of fear? Like you can't, you're chasing that forever. Or a
yep,
lot of guys do, if they can't find their own ways to, tap back into that. But
You just keep
yep,
deploying.
yep.
right.
It's
Which
and
some guys do,
Yeah, and you saw that, right? You saw guys that deployed until they died, literally, right? Like they deployed till their number was found. And other guys, to your point, that get out and thrill seek, and they're seeking something that is really a intangible that's unable to be captured again unless you're back there,
Yeah.
right? And it's just like, in looking at psychology studies on it and stuff, it's just like a drug, right? The more you use, the more you become inoculated to it, right? And you have to use more. So guys that start deploying over and over and over, they got to get in bigger and better gunfights to feel that again, right? And eventually that pushes so far that either it burns and fries out their brain, which does happen, and I can't remember the psychological term for it, but it's basically the adrenaline and the stress actually rewires and fries part of your brain, and the dopamine receptors, all that kind of stuff, don't function correctly, or they get out and they chase that, right? If it's with action sports, with drugs, with whatever, thrill seeking in any shape or form, some in crazy stuff like larceny and stuff. I mean, guys will seek that if they're addicted to it, right? And I think that's something that's hard, that a lot of guys don't talk about, right? Is that some guys are addicted to it, and they don't know how to come off that high, and they'll be self-destructive until it works, right? It does what they want it to do, which is destroy them. And man, I mean, some guys really push into dark places, trying to find that high again, and experimenting with drugs that shouldn't be experimented with. I mean, THC and stuff has its place and works, and but some of these new drugs coming on the market, I mean, it can absolutely kill you, right? And they're just like, oh, that's the new thing, let me try it, right? And then guess what? They OD'd last week, right? And I mean, we had one of our guys, his daughter was born, and he OD'd on heroin that night,
Mm.
um, and because he was trying to celebrate, and it's like, guys are pushing in the wrong direction, right? And being able to harness that, I think takes more strength than being over there, because being over there is easy, right? Like being in combat is the easiest thing in the world. You get pointed in a direction and you go be violent, right? And then stuff happens, you fix it, you go, and you rinse repeat the next day, right? Or shoot, 3 hours later, 5 hours later, right? Life is hard, right? Like dealing with monotony of life, because the life isn't the constant adrenaline high, right? Like you have ebbs and flows, and you might go through years of just normalcy, right? And
But
you know,
that's that stress, that's a stress thing right there. That's the problem that we have here, is that one, the environment isn't conducive to discuss this on a very multi-stranded layer. Two, we don't have a proper definition of what it means to be masculine today. It's spread across various subcultures and philosophies. But
Yep.
two, we don't acknowledge now. Like, I'll give you a perfect example. 2019, after 4 tours and basically training every day, like I was going to war, does have a compounding effect. So in 2019, after I got back from Kabul and all that other shit, it compounded neurochemicals that I couldn't control. It wasn't that I wasn't weak; it was just that my adrenal glands were exhausted. My HPA axis was fucking through the roof with too much cortisol levels, and I didn't have a support network that I needed in order to accommodate that. And we were brought up on the basis that you suck it up, you keep going. So there's a lot of guys out there that. So I mean, I was still functional. You could send me to a combat zone, I'd be functioning. It was the other additional stresses that we don't talk about, right? Like this idea of meaninglessness, this nihilism, this existential dread that we have from day-to-day activities. Now the technologies that pervade, but also too blood work, right? Testosterone. I was just reading. Well, I was studying some of the Marine Corps directorate stuff, and one of the key issues that the United States is facing and globally is that there's been a massive drop in testosterone. So the testosterone levels of the men today are probably 60% lower than what they were, from the previous generation, and then vice versa. It goes all the way back. So that's part of the issue that, American men face today, and why we're probably seeing some of the things that we are seeing today as a result of low testosterone and the way that we don't have the environment to discuss all these intricacies that lead to all these areas. And that's kind of like what we're trying to fix here is that issue is, how do you get a once upon a time guy that was a top tier guy who is in an elite fighting force, and then all of a sudden a year, 2 years after they get out, it's a whole totally different person. What's going on there?
Yep.
And that's an environmental thing, not just like an environmental in terms of like my physical space, but the invisible spaces, right? What's that support network look like? Where you're working, are they trauma informed? Do they understand the complexities of that? And another thing too is, how do you go and portray today this kind of like metaphysical sense that there is still a connection? How do you reassemble that? Like, how do you retether that with other guys? And I think for at least OIF, OEF guys, I think it's been what, like 10, 20 years. So most guys are at that point now where they're able to, guys who have survived thus far are now able to tap into that just a little bit.
Yep. And that's the other thing that's very systemic right now, right? Is the brovet culture, right? Like these guys that want to look like they're some super whatever, they have everything worked out. And the reality is nobody does, right? Like, and like going back to that study you were talking about, I think the exact study you're talking about, I read the other day, and I believe it is that men today have 70% less testosterone than men in the 50s, right? So right after World War II and all that kind of stuff. And that's a problem, right? And that changes how guys act, that changes, our attitudes, our interactions with other men, with women. It is the building block of who men are, and what it's the hormone that really makes us who we are. And if that's lower, that's going to affect, guys. I mean, look at the marriage rate nowadays, right? Like of nuclear families. I mean, that's plummeting significantly, right? Because guys don't know how to be guys anymore, and be good men, right? And and then you have guys coming back from war that have a different perspective. And I find it very interesting because of all the guys I know that I deployed with and everything, there's literally two types. There's either the one that went completely astray. They do not have their life together. I don't think they'll ever have their life together. And then the others that, the other, I think it's 50-50, the other 50% that it made them excel, right? Like it took them and it made them into a better person. And even though they're broken mentally, because all of us are, to your point about, adrenaline burnout and stuff like that, and for years after I got back from Afghanistan, if my adrenaline gland, what the doctors were telling me is that it had enlarged. And so when we would get into gunfights, I would literally feel my heart and then kick off. Like it would literally feel like I had a miniature heart attack really fast, but it was because my adrenaline gland was dumping so much into me. And that lasted for years. And I didn't get past that until at least 3 or 4 years after, getting back. And that took a lot of, just self work, right? Meditation, things to really figure out what was causing that. I still sometimes have it happen to me today. It's very rare, but the same thing. And if I don't get a hold of that, or should I say back then I thought, if I don't get a hold of this when I'm 40, I'm going to have a heart attack, right? Like I'm going to have a heart attack and flatline in front of my kids. And I can't do that, right? Like, and the other thing is, goes back to that mentality of men today, is that help is not okay, right? And you're not allowed to go get help because then you're not a man. And that's anything from the truth. And the other thing is that a lot of psychology and stuff today, it's getting better, but for years it was not designed to help men, specifically combat veterans, in any way, shape, or form. It was designed to help women and like people who have been abused and stuff, right? And they slowly have been working and getting better with combat veterans and men in general that are seeking help in a positive way, to better themselves and to fix trauma, to fix things. And it's slowly becoming better. And I heard some idiotic, not a podcast, but some kind of thing where they were talking about, oh, well, men are weaker, right? Like, and stuff because they seek help. And I'm like, no, there's a difference. I know some pretty hard dudes, like really hard dudes that would make you question your manhood, that have gone and gotten help, right? That would make you question who you are as a man because of how badass they are, right? How truly men they are. But they sought help because they know they need it, right? I have my first counseling appointment in 10 days, right? And because my wife identified some stuff that I kind of was ignoring, right? So I'm going to go see counseling, right? It just is. And sometimes you just need that to make sure that you're a better man, a better person, a better father, a better husband. And a lot of people aren't willing to do that, right? Like it's almost taboo to mention it, right? Like even right now, just being a man and mentioning that is weird, right? To other guys that I've been to combat with, right? And within distance, but still, we were in the same AL, right? We were hooking and jabbing together. And it's weird to talk about that because culturally, that's not okay in the warfighting culture, right? Like you're going to be okay, right? When you were over there, you didn't have time to think about that shit. There was, you watched someone die the day before, right? You're like, I mentioned that thing about the child. We had a kid come through our ECP for days, for weeks, and he became our friend. We gave him food. We talked to him. He was a great little kid. I can't remember his name. It wasn't Muhammad, but it was something, Allah Hazin or something. And he was maybe 8, maybe 10, somewhere in that range. One day he comes through sobbing, crying. And I was like, got the interpreter over there. I'm like, what is this kid going off about? Right? Like he normally comes and he hangs out with us for like an hour or two. Right. And then what he was saying was, I don't want my Marine friends to die. I don't want my Marine friends to die. Or like, what are you talking about? And he's like, the Taliban put IEDs in my field last night and they want you guys walk through it every day and they want to kill you. And we're like, okay, well, do you know how to read a map? Yes. Where's your house? He showed us. We sent a sweep team out there, picked up 3 IEDs. Next day, he didn't come through. Next day, he didn't come through. A week later, a couple of teenagers are coming through. We're like, hey, whatever the kid's name was, have you seen him? And they're like, oh no, he's dead. Like, what are you talking about? Sent a platoon out there. That night, they pulled the father and him, because he was the only other boy in the family, put them on their knees and cut their heads off in front of the entire family and orphaned the rest of the family, wife and 3 daughters, because he talked to us. And that is shit that is not easy to process. That is not something that is easy to deal with. That is not something easy to think about. It still messes me to this day, because just because a kid was my friend and actually liked me and actually loved me, he died because he didn't want me to die. And that is something that's hard to process. And there is nothing on this planet that can make sense of that, right? Like, and the only thing that can make sense of that's talking about it and understanding that that kid did what he thought was right. And knowing the only solace I have in is that we went and got payback. We pushed to the 1-9 a couple days later and took it to him hard, and harder than we had ever taken it to him, because they made a mistake. They hurt one of our friends. And we were able to deal with that. And that's the only solace I have from it, is that we were able to go after that and avenge him and his family. Because you and I both, all you guys know this, but in Afghanistan, if you're the head of the household and the men die, your entire family is no longer worth anything on the planet. And your entire family, your wife and any daughters you have, are considered orphans and are sent to an orphanage. They're not even allowed to stay in their home anymore. So not only did they kill the husband and the son, they killed all 4 of them too, 100%. There's no way they had any ability to survive. And trauma like that, things like that you go through, you have to deal with them, right? You have to talk about them. You have to process that, because that is not normal, right? Like, that's not something we're going to deal with here. Right?
Well, and that to that point, I mean, I had in an earlier conversation, when we were working our area, one of the first patrols I went out on, or my squad went out trying to, just do a vibe check, mingle with the people and everything. And they were, it was so you mentioned the Ramadi deployment. It was so we've referenced that as like a humanitarian deployment, basically, in a combat
100%.
zone. One of the at the time deadliest cities in the world.
Yep.
And we're just handing out food and just being nice to these kids. But anyways, completely different. These people are like, no, I don't even want to speak to you. If they see me speaking to you, they will come kill me, my family, whatever. And I was just like, wow, like, how are we going to even do this deployment then? Like,
Yeah.
we have zero help. It's basically just, go out here till you get shot at or blown up, and then try to do your work from there. But that's why I always say, when people who are just keyboard warriors or whatever, and they want to talk about knowing war history and what our country should be doing, that story you just told is the exact reason why anyone that went and fought and lost brothers there or got injured there should be okay with what they did, because those people, the Taliban, and that ideology does not need to exist in this world. This is not just a uniformed enemy that, I'm my enemy's enemy type deal. These people should not exist. They shouldn't breathe the same oxygen we all breathe because of that, because they have no humanity at all.
Yep.
And when the drawdown happened and then the fall of Afghanistan, as people reference it, like, everybody has a hard time with that, and they're just like, oh, was it all for nothing? No, like, any one of them we could have killed, it made a difference. I know it's hard to stop things like that, that they're going to always probably exist to a certain extent, but the more we can limit them, the better. Was it worth all the lives and all the money? That's a different debate, but
That's for history to decide.
yeah,
right?
exactly. But
And,
I mean,
well, and going to your point, was it all worth it? Right. And I think back to my friends that were our interpreters, families that got out of there, right? Families that we saved, you know, who knows what kind of good we were able to do over there, right? Um, and you know, even Iraq, you know, there was a lot of stuff that's an unquantifiable, you know, number that goes through it. And the thing is that we can't focus on the fall. We have to focus on what was done when we were there, and were you able to do it, and was it done honorably, right? And that's something else I told my team and my entire squad before we went in. And I said, what matters is not, right, what happens. It's what you do and the honor in which you do it. If you do something dishonorable, you will live with that. But if you keep your honor, then you don't have to wonder if you did the right thing, right? If you fight honorably, no matter what happens, you fought honorably, and you can live with that. And remember that most likely, percentage-wise, you're going home. And whatever you do here will last with you for the rest of your life. And I know people who have done very bad things overseas, and it eats them alive permanently. And I told them this because I knew this before we went. And I was like, look, you need to understand that you need to fight with honor, and that do what you can in our little section. And then we go home, and you do what you can in that time. And how you conduct yourself and what you do is what matters. And I think a lot of guys had hard times with that, thinking that they didn't do enough. You know, it's always the, you know, survivor's guilt, no matter how that manifests, and things like that. You need to understand that there's only so much you could have done, right? But if you did it with honor, and, you know, like, do I regret being that kid's friend? No. Do I regret that I couldn't save him? Absolutely, every day. And especially now that I have kids, right? Like, I can't even imagine what his father was thinking at that moment, right? And, you know, it for all I know, his father could have been the one that told him to go tell him, right? And his father made that choice, and that's fine too. And, you know, thinking back on that, you know, but what we did while we were there was done with honor. And there's nothing I did overseas that I regret, right? I have several people I know that did things that they regret, and I absolutely did. And that is okay, right? And I think that is where there's some guys that there's things that were done overseas that will never be spoken of. And that's why some guys PTSD is as bad as it is, right? And it's not from war, right? It's from personal action. And some of that can't be undone, right? And you have to live with that. And you know, that's the price of going over there so young for a lot of guys. I mean, Steve was 17 when he joined. He was 18 right before we deployed. And he went through all that. I mean, I was 26, right? I turned 26 while we were in Afghanistan. And I had a different philosophy and a different view on life, right? But that's why I think, you know, leaders now need to understand that leading is a verb, right? You have to do it, right? It's not some philosophical thing. You have to lead. You have to do that action, right? And follow your words with action, and that is true leadership. You know, and a lot of leaders I think today don't get that, right? And they don't understand that you have to lead. You have to actually do that as an action, and your men have to follow you, right? You don't lead them, right, in the way of they're in front and walking. You lead them from the front. You walk in front of them and they follow your footsteps, and they understand what you're doing. And countless times overseas, I did that. And I did it like looking for IEDs. I can't count the amount of times I walked in front of everybody to look for IEDs because I knew what to look for because I was a senior guy and I had seen it before. And I almost stepped on it, right? But my boot, Steve, that was with me, didn't know what those things looked like. He had no idea that I almost stepped on one. He didn't even recognize it. I brought him up with a metal detector, and he barely found it with the metal detector, right? But leading from the front prevented anybody from dying, right? And when we blew that thing, it was 90 pounds of HME. That created a freaking 40-foot mushroom cloud coming out of the ground in a 6-foot hole, right? So, that's true leadership, is you have to be able to lead and guide your guys by example, not by words, right? And I think a lot of people have lost that nowadays. And I saw a lot of leaders like that over there, right? They guided by words, not by actions, right? And we'd have guys come to our squad and they're just like, you guys actually stand post? Like as the team leaders and stuff? I'm like, absolutely. Everybody here works. Like there are no passengers on this ship, right? Like, I mean, it's the one story I think that is the moment I learned true leadership, absolute true leadership. We had lost Jeremy Lasher and those guys from that IED hit, and we had to go secure OP North, and then we were doing patrols constantly. It was 8 hours out, 8 hours in, and 8 hours in was on post, 100%. There was no sleeping. We did it for 96 hours. We had 96 hours of that sleep. It was insane. I'd never seen hallucinations like that. And I'll never forget, it was about 72 hours in. So on the third day, it was nighttime. It was probably 2 a.m. And I'm walking around kind of as like the SOG, right? Like checking on all the guys, making sure everybody's awake because I knew we were strung out. And I'm walking guys food, water. And I go over to Steve, and he's hurting. And we had one of the guys, we were getting augmented from other squads. And I was like, look, Steve, you got to go to sleep. I was like, sleep right here, right now. And he looked at me and he literally collapsed and just passed out immediately. I bucked him up against the wall. I held for 2 hours and watched and let him sleep for 2 hours. I woke him up. He got up. I walk over to Tim, and I'll never forget this. This is seared into my mind. He was looking down this street, and I looked at him, and he was done. His mental capacity was probably 10% at that moment. He was not there. I looked at him. I was like, Tim, you got to sleep. Like, and me and Tim had been together since we joined 2A. He's one of my best friends. He looks at me, and even though I was leading, he was still my best friend and my brother. He looks at me, and I was like, Tim, you got to sleep. And he starts crying, just tears pouring down his face. And he's not like sobbing. He's just visibly crying in the night vision. I was like, Tim, you got to sleep. And he's like, I'm good. I'm good. And the whole reason he was crying is because he thought he was failing me. And I was like, really? Like, you're not failing me. I told him, I said, you're not failing me. You need to sleep. I need to lead you in this moment. You need to sleep. And he looks at me with tears in his eyes. He drops to his knees and passes out while he's crying because he was that far gone. And I sat for 2 hours, and I think it was actually 3 hours. I just stayed awake, covered his section. And he kind of comes to because he literally passed out. He was that far gone. He wakes up, he kind of stands up, and he just looks at me. And he looked at me different than he ever had before. And that's the moment where I realized, wow, this is leadership. This is sacrifice. This is what I have to do. This is my guys. I will sacrifice for them. I have to, because this is what drove him. This is going to drive him, right? This is what has to happen. And I had hallucinated, talked on the radio while he was sleeping. It was crazy time. Then sun's rising, and I'm walking around. I still got a job to do, right? Walk around. We went for another 24 hours, right? And we finally got relieved, finally got able to sleep. Everybody literally passed out on the floor, like on the dirt, right? Slept for like 8 hours. But I'll never forget, because I woke up from that, and to this day, I can picture in my dreams, in my night vision, tears running down Tim's face and the look on his face. And just the look that he didn't want to fail me, right? It was not that he was tired, nothing. It was that the man did not want to fail me. And he thought he was failing me in that moment. And I had to make sure he understood it wasn't a failure. He just needed sleep. It was just, he wasn't going to fail me in that moment. I needed to lead him, and he needed to listen that I saw that he was going to fail. And before he failed, he needed to sleep, and he did it. And, in that moment, you think back, and I push on leadership and think on those times. And it's just, that sticks out in my mind what true leadership is, right? Is you have to sacrifice. You have to be able to make the hard calls that is to your detriment sometimes. And that is the only thing that is the definition of being a verb, being leadership, actually acting on leadership. And it's never easy. That wasn't easy at all. That was the hardest 96 hours of my life. And we were getting firefights, everything, dead tired, and hardest time of my life. But the biggest lessons learned in those 4 days, I learned more lessons in those 4 days than almost that entire deployment combined. And that's crazy to think back on. And that's combat.
Yeah, and that kind of back to what you know the whole thing where you need the stone, right? And it's like, what do you do when you don't have that? How do you teach leadership when when that's so far removed that, who of course we're still here, right? I mean,
I think that's it. It's up to us, right? Like sometimes it might take, and that's like my buddy that was still in. Um, I kind of helped him. He had questions about leadership because he'd never been to combat, and me and him talked about this kind of stuff. And I was like, "Look, you have to lead. There's no question. You're a sergeant. You got to lead. You've never been to combat, but you're an 0311, right? But you have to lead, and this is how."
Yeah, and that's another thing too. It's not, there's no this isn't, the good old boys club where if you don't
yeah.
have combat experience, you can't be a leader. Like you absolutely
Yeah.
can. But like you're saying, you have to implement that in
Yeah.
your daily actions. You can't just talk it. You have to be it.
Well, and I think that's the point is that combat veterans can't be selfish and they have to be able to pass that on. They have to give young leaders their knowledge in their head because they're not going to get it the same way we did, right? And we have to not be selfish about our knowledge, and you have to give of it freely. And I think a lot of guys, have that entitlement that they were combat, whatever. Who cares, right? I mean, back in our day, everybody was a combat vet. It was nothing special, right? And especially in our times in. And but now it's like guys don't have that opportunity because it's an opportunity. It's not, and since they don't, we need to be able to teach if they ask, right? You need to be an open book. And that's I think our role nowadays as aging combat veterans, just as it was for the Vietnam vets, right, is teaching that to the younger leaders during the time of no war. So, but anyways, guys, I gotta go. My boss just landed. I gotta go pick him up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I appreciate you coming on and sharing that. That was pretty deep, and I think a lot of guys will appreciate you sharing that. Just real quick before you go, do you want to give anybody a shout out, from your experiences in life that you appreciate?
Man, I mean, my parents, I mean, there's a lot that defines me today that they instilled in me that I took into the Marines and passed on to other guys. Steve Bolchi, you aren't a bitch. You actually were awesome in combat, and they did you wrong. I want to set the record absolutely straight there. And then I mean, all my boys in 2-8, man, they're hard. And there's guys even today that I'd take into combat right now, our old broken selves still kick indoors right now if we needed to. So but yeah, it's good times, man. I appreciate you guys having me on. It's awesome. I really hope somebody gets to take some of this stuff. I think we did go pretty deep, which I didn't think it was going to go this deep or get this kind of philosophical, which is awesome. I like these kind of conversations. This is real conversation, right? This isn't pithy, surface level stuff. We're diving deep, and I like that. I like what you guys are doing here. So it's awesome. I appreciate you guys.
Cool. Appreciate it, Josh.
So
Don't upset your boss. Don't be late.
I know, right?